Time is just gone 9:24 a.m. as we continue with the show this morning. And it's time now to link up with Professor of Linguistic and Discourse Analysis at the Islamic University of Gaza, Dr. Mosheer Amer. We're talking about Israel, we're talking about its aggression on Palestine during the year 2021. And Dr. Amer has made certain statements, particularly looking at women, saying that these unprecedented abuses targeting women prisoners touch a raw nerve of the Palestinian people and would bring the already precarious situation at the point of an all-out explosion against the occupation, and also the Israeli occupation's brutalities targeting the Palestinian female detainees is a flagrant violation of basic human rights and internationally applicable norms and rules on treatment of prisoners. Dr. Amer, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Welcome, brother, and welcome to all your listeners.
Yes, Jazakallah khairan so much for joining us. Now, we know we've seen this Palestine Center for Human Rights, their weekly report on Israel human rights violations against the people of Palestine. We know there have been many of these violations in 2021, and many of them obviously were very, very serious in terms of incursion, in terms of arresting Palestinian civilians. We've seen house demolitions. Yeah. We've seen so much, Dr. Amer, happening in 2021 once again.
I totally agree. I mean, the year 2021 was a very difficult year for the Palestinian people, and a year that showed extreme brutality and aggression by the Israeli occupation against the Palestinian people, whether in the Gaza Strip or the West Bank or occupied Jerusalem or the lands occupied in 1948. So we're talking about a context of apartheid, a context of colonialism, a context of occupation practiced against the Palestinian people, and also a context of resistance, a context of steadfastness that the Palestinian people and struggle for freedom and for their basic rights against this brutal occupation. I think the major watershed event was last May when the Israeli occupation forces attacked Gaza with causing close to 280 Palestinians killed, and thousands, close to 9,000 people were killed, and there was a massive destruction in civilian infrastructure, and a lot of human suffering, a lot of devastation that Israeli occupation caused. But it's not only in the Gaza Strip with this suffocating siege that has been going on for the past 15 years, but we're talking also about systematic colonial settlement activities within the West Bank, aggressiveness and settler attacks against the Palestinians, targeting villages, confiscating lands, confiscating property, as well as this Judaization of the East Jerusalem of Al-Aqsa Mosque, and an attempt for spatial and temporal division of Al-Aqsa Mosque in preparation for a complete seizure of Al-Aqsa Mosque and building what is called the Jewish Temple. And we're talking about also massive brutalities and abuses and violations of the human rights of the Palestinian prisoners, and last of which was the abuses targeting Palestinian female prisoners in flagrant violation of international norms, international and applicable international conventions, and laws on the protection and maintaining the safety of and dignity of the political prisoners. So this is the context of apartheid. This is a context of occupation and colonialism that the Palestinian people have been going on has been subjected to for the past 73 years. And the year 2021 has been a difficult year for us Palestinians in this very difficult context of war and aggression that is practiced against the Palestinian people.
Yes, Dr. Amer, and also not forgetting Sheikh Jarrah, not forgetting Silwan. And you've made the statement where you're saying that pressure must be exercised on the occupation authorities to immediately de-escalate by stopping their cruel, degrading treatment and granting the Palestinian detainees their dignity and guaranteed freedoms. under international conventions and obligations, because that is another problem on its own, apart from the collective punishment policy that this brutal Zionist regime has been meting out against the people of Palestine.
I totally agree with you, and this is the proper and the correct course of action that the Israeli occupation has to take, which is to de-escalate and to end this brutality, to end this aggression practice against the Palestinian people, and to comply with international resolutions and United Nations resolutions with norms of human dignity. That the Palestinians deserve their rights, their basic freedoms, their right to freedom, to self-determination, to live in freedom, away from colonialism and away from aggression. And therefore, pressure, all kinds of pressure, must be exercised on the Israeli occupation to end this occupation. And in this context, we want the whole world to express, especially from our Muslim brothers and sisters in South Africa and everywhere, to express solidarity with the Palestinian people against this injustice, against this racial and ethnic discrimination, and to exercise pressure against this longest and most dangerous occupation on a planet Earth, and to work to support the Palestinian people in their struggle for freedom and their struggle for ending the occupation. I think the issue of and the movement for BDS is quite timely and is a must, actually. And this is a form of solidarity with the Palestinian people by working to boycott Israel culturally, academically, economically, and diplomatically, and in all fields, so that Israeli leaders know that their crimes against the Palestinian people cannot go unpunished, and there is and they have to comply with international norms and resolutions and give the Palestinians back their rights to freedom and self-determination.
Yes, but as you say, speak about cultural, and we talk about BDS, we talk about economic as well. But sadly, we're talking about Muslim brothers and sisters in South Africa. But Dr. Amer, we've seen even during the height of the problems that had taken place in May, where we've seen an entire world respond. We've seen the massive protests in almost every major city in the world, and we've seen now. And this morning, I covered the story briefly, where we talk about a country like Morocco that had renewed official relations with Israel, celebrating the first year anniversary. We've seen what the likes of the UAE has been doing, opening up to Israel in more ways than one. We've heard about Saudi Arabia talking about relationship with Israel, about Sudan, about Bahrain. And this is a sad part, where we're calling upon humanitarians, we're talking about Muslims right across the entire world, and yet we have some of these countries that are celebrating this relationship with Israel.
Well, this is really unfortunate, and we, the Palestinian people, consider this as a stab in the back from these normalizing regimes in the Arab world. This is really not the proper and the right course of action that these regimes must take. Instead of punishing Israel, instead of criminalizing and marginalizing Israel, we see all these normalization attempts with the Israeli occupation, state, as if they were rewarding Israel for its crimes against the Palestinians instead of punishing it. So this is really unacceptable, and it is a treason to the Palestinian people, to the struggle of the Palestinian people for freedom and its self-determination. It's quite ironic that we see peoples around the world, in London, in America, and in Europe, and everywhere in South Africa, they've shown support, complete support for the Palestinian people. And we see that the international public opinion in these countries is quite in support of the Palestinian people's struggle and calling for punishing Israel. And we see some Arab regimes are trying to normalize with Israel. So this is something that is unacceptable for the Palestinian people, and something that must be rejected. And we call on these normalizing regimes to actually shift course and to return to the situation where they are historically. They were in support of the Palestinian people, in support of the Palestinian rights, and and calls for freedom. We're really sad to see all these attempts by these normalizing countries. But on the other hand, we see the peoples in Morocco, in Saudi Arabia, in some other countries, actually they are expressing and showing utter support for the Palestinian people, as opposed to their regimes, as opposed to their governments. So we are quite confident that the peoples all over the world, these peoples in the Arab world, are with the Palestinian struggle, are with their central cause. They consider the Palestinian struggle for freedom as their central cause. They consider Al-Aqsa as their own their priority, and the liberation of Al-Aqsa as their own priority. So this is really a sad context to seek normalization. But on the other hand, we know that this is a very difficult struggle that the Palestinian people are going through. And in this context, we see all kinds of people backtracking, people betraying, but also there are also people who are supporting and standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people. We should not feel helpless. We're hopeful that Allah is with us, and all the brothers and sisters all over the world, and especially in South Africa. We see the government of South Africa, we see the peoples of South Africa are in total support, diplomatically and in other forms of support, are in support with the Palestinian people.
Summa to your du'as, and we continue making dua as well for the people of Palestine. And we appreciate you taking time out, Dr. Mosheer Amer, talking to us here on Salam Media this morning. Allah make it easy for you. Allah accept your efforts. And as I said, we will continue speaking out. We will continue in the campaigns to make sure that Palestine, inshallah, one day shall be free of this brutal occupation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Barakallah fikum. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, brother.
Dr. Mosheer Amer joining us this morning, just taking a look back at 2021 and what this has meant for the people of Palestine, the aggression on Palestine by this brutal Zionist regime.
These days, I'm more health conscious than ever. So tonight it's stir fry for dinner, cooked in healthy Helios pure sunflower cooking oil.